Okay, welcome to windy.com. I really like this website for a number of reasons. This is actually a really good technical website for meteorologists because it actually allows you to view both current conditions as well as modeled conditions, which you can actually toggle between down here. That's a little beyond the scope of this class, but I at least wanted to say that. What we are actually going to do, though, is we are going to use this website to get a snapshot of global circulation. And we're going to then compare it to the conclusions that we came up with in the single cell and three cell models. All right, so let's do that. Okay, so first thing we need to do is, it's nice to look at California, but we actually want to zoom out a little bit. Why? Because we're not the only game in town. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have us zoom out. You can zoom out by either clicking on this negative sign up here, or using your mouse, or using the little track button on your mouse, just keep scrolling down and that's going to zoom you out. So here we go. Now we have a nice picture of the Pacific Ocean basin. Now, for this particular assignment, we're going to be looking at two things. We're going to be looking at wind, and we're going to be looking at air pressure. So we're going to be looking at wind, and we're going to be looking at air pressure. So right here, we're just looking at wind, but I want to add that layer of air pressure. Now, the way that you can do that, I actually already have it here on my menu, but the way that you can do it, if it's not already there, click on More Layers, and you'll actually see a nice little menu of things that you can add to the map. What I want you to do is scroll down until you see pressure. So there's all kinds of things. There's sea temperature. There we go. There's pressure. If it isn't already toggled on, just click this little sliding thing to toggle it on. And then once you do that, it's going to look like a little, almost like a speedometer. Click on it, and there we go. We have now a map of air pressure. So, now that we have this map of air pressure, let's talk about what's going on. So, in the single-celled model, one of the conclusions that we came to is that air pressure is typically pretty low, or at least it's lower than other locations. And if you actually take a look, so the equator is right around here. I'll put a little dot right near where the equator should be. That should be right around where the equator should be. And let me zoom out. And the equator should basically span all the way from east to west and from west to east. Okay, so what does this mean though? What do these colors mean? What do these little swirly things mean? Let's talk about the colors here. So green represents right around the average air pressure for the entire world, which is 29.92 inches of mercury. Anything below that starts to get shadings of blue. Anything higher than that begins getting shadings of yellow and red and eventually brown. And one of the things that you'll actually notice is that down here near the equator, pressures are either right about average, you get that green, or are below average. So how does that actually relate to the single cell model, which had low pressure at the equator? Well, the way that we can figure that out is, since air pressures are either near average or below average, and they're definitely lower than either areas north or south of the equator, we can usually pretty confidently say that there's relatively low pressure here near the equator. Now, that being said, one thing I will mention, and this is going to become more important in the next activity, is if you notice, the eastern half of the Pacific has slightly higher pressure than the western half of the Pacific. Why would that be? Well, we're going to talk about that in the next activity. But let's talk about a few more things before I end this video. Okay, so next few things I want to talk about are these. First off, let's talk about these little white lines. They look like little tadpoles swimming. These tadpoles that are swimming, I guess that's what I can call them, they indicate wind flow. And if you actually notice down here near the equator, there's a few little swirls north of the equator. These are actually developing tropical storms. But for the most part, near the equator, winds are generally blowing from west to east, especially here in the eastern and central part of the Pacific. The reason why this is happening is because of something called the trade winds, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. Okay, now let's get away from the equator. Let's go up to about 30 degrees north. Now, about 30 degrees north, that's right about here. It's right about here. If you notice, near 30 degrees north and a little bit north of 30 degrees north, there's a lot of red and brown. Much higher pressure is present further north. And if you did the same thing in the southern hemisphere, went down to about 30 degrees south, there are these big areas of high pressure that are present. These big areas of higher pressure that are present. Finally, if we were to actually continue going further south, down towards 60 degrees south, which 60 degrees is right about halfway between the tip of South America and this northern peninsula of Antarctica, right around here. You actually notice here at 60, pressures are a lot lower than they were near 30. And then finally, we're actually going to use the northern hemisphere here because the North Pole is almost entirely ocean, whereas the South Pole is entirely land. If you notice, near the pole, there's this giant area of high pressure near the pole. How does that relate to what we found in the single cell model? It's pretty much in agreement with it. This giant high pressure near the pole. That being said, let me just really quickly, to scroll down, all you have to do is take your little hand cursor, click it on there, and then you can use that to drag. If you actually notice, near the South Pole over Antarctica, we don't have as high pressure. Why would that be? Well, I'll let you take a guess as to why that may be in the going deeper part of today's lab. So that's it. That's how to look for air pressure on windy.com. One other tiny thing I'll say real quick is that there is some discrepancy between this. The first thing is that I mainly looked over ocean basins. And the reason why is because land has different thermodynamic characters than the ocean. And plus there's terrain. There's things that can muck this all up. The second reason why I looked primarily over the ocean is these high and low pressure systems are primarily prevalent over the ocean. So that's windy.com, and as I just mentioned a second ago, there is some inconsistency with this. Remember, this is just a model. It only gives us a general idea. It gives us the average condition of the atmosphere. But as you can see here in the mid-southern Atlantic, there are these two giant low-pressure systems here. These are probably what are called mid-latitude cyclones. So there is going to be some inconsistency like that. Okay, that's it for windy.com.